Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, I catch up with longtime friend and colleague Phyl Terry, sharing reflections going back 25 years in the e-commerce usability field and exploring Phil's new book, Never Search Alone. Based on 25 years of experience working with thousands of leaders, the book provides a time-tested, multi-step process to find the right job now, one that sits at the intersection of hopes, dreams, and market realities.
This book isn't me sitting in a room thinking big thoughts, I'm smart, let me tell you what to do. This book is based on 20 years of working with thousands of people and then hundreds of them using the book and applying it. I really wanted to do it that way. So there's three big ideas that carry most of the weight. Let's make sure your readers understand that. The first is the title of the book, Never Search Alone. That idea is, hey, yes, look at when networking, resume, LinkedIn, negotiating, all these things are important. But it turns out the most important thing you need to manage in your job search is your emotional balance.
Phyl, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast, my friend. How are you?
I'm good, Michael. It's great to be here with you.
Well, you and I have known each other, I was counting, since the late 90s, back in the go-go days, and it's been my pleasure to kind of keep track of what you've been up to. Always so interesting. So it's wonderful to hear your voice, and thanks again for joining me.
I'm glad to be here. I'm excited, Michael. My new book, Never Search Alone, is out after 6 years of hard work. We'll get into it, but really appreciate you inviting me.
But let's jump right in. Let's talk about you. I mean, when you and I first met, at least I was in the .com trying to figure out things like usability and customer focus, and that's where you and I had intersected. But for the folks listening, give us a bit of a personal and professional journey, and you were up to so many things, so we could spend a half hour just talking about all the things you're involved in. But give us the Coles Notes, so to speak, of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. I'll just briefly say that this new book, Never Search Alone, is both an extension and departure from where I've come from. I think that's an interesting thing. I think you're probably digging into. But you and I met in the 90s. I had been a part of the first startup team that Amazon the company first startup that Amazon bought. Company no one's ever heard of anymore. It was called Planet All, and we were actually the first. If we didn't know what we were doing, if we had realized we were building the first LinkedIn, we might have hung in there. But we sold to Amazon, and then, I had created a council of internet CEOs when I was at Harvard Business School with McKinsey. It's really the first kind of private peer forum in the very early internet world. And then later, after the startup, I then partnered with a good friend and built a customer experience consulting firm, Creative Good. Mm-hmm. And I was the CEO of that for 15 years. We were pioneers in customer experience in the internet world. When we started, there was literally maybe one other firm kind of thinking about those questions. And when I sold the business 15 years later, there were thousands and thousands of software firms, consulting agencies, design firms. But we were pioneers, and for those listening, let's say the younger executives, folks listening, I mean, back in the early days of .com, I always equated it to the early days of automobiles. Like every automobile worked differently. Like the gas pedal was left, right, or center, and that's how .com worked. Like you'd go to a different site, and every checkout was different, and you had to figure out every site. Like those were interesting, chaotic, but necessary days. But it's so different back then than it is today, right? Well, I love being at, sort of at the very beginning of things, which, by the way, is where I think I am with this book, Never Search Alone, which again, we'll get back to. But the job search has not been disrupted in 50 years. Yeah. And I think we're on the precipice of a big change there. But in the early days of the internet, everything was bespoke, everything was custom. Mm-hmm. And in fact, Michael, you might laugh at this. Like I was literally one of the first people to to teach retailers that there was something important called a conversion rate.
Yeah, I remember. Like, who cares? I just want to buy an ad on the Super Bowl. Isn't that going to get me where I need to go?
Exactly. Yeah. And I'll never forget. Like, we went into Gateway Computer, which again, your listeners, if they're younger, won't know, but they had been a pioneer in custom made computers along with Dell, direct order. And they were neck and neck with Dell at the time. They've since gone away. But, we went in and said, hey, conversion rate's important, and your customers are completely confused. And we boosted conversion rate by 40% in that project, generated $100 million in the first year in incremental revenue.
I hope you had a percentage growth deal on that one, but you probably didn't, right?
Michael, I tried. They did not want to give me that, and I tried after that. Yeah. We ended up we worked with Apple, Facebook. We did 400 projects. Wow. Almost every leading retailer, software firm out there for those 15 years. It was a great ride. But along the way, I started this thing. So when I was at business school in the 90s, I had created that CEO Council. Mm-hmm. And then in the early 2000s, I created the councils for internet executives. It started with Google and Amazon and Travelocity. Back in 2002, this is actually our 20th anniversary, 20 years. We've had thousands of senior executives come through the councils. It's a very simple program. We simply put leaders together in non-competing companies in small forums and teach them to ask for help. Now, again, when I did this in 2002, nobody else was doing this, certainly not in the internet world, and certainly no one had done anything like it for VP, GM level folks.
Now, unpack that a little for us, because what you said there is very interesting. So it's not unusual to have groups together for networking or for associations, but you have a very particular bent, and of course, it's a thread that runs through the book that ask for help. Unpack that for the listeners.
Sure. And just so the listeners know, and Michael, you and I, we met, I think, in the context of shop.org.
Yeah.
In the late 90s, shop.org was a couple hundred people. We all knew each other in the early days of web and e-commerce. Today it's thousands. And I said, hey, we need a private environment where, a small group, 10, 12 people, where a leader can really be open, vulnerable, and ask for help. And, where you can really address what I call the knowing doing gap. You can know that it's important to be vulnerable. You can know that it's important to ask for help, which I've been an evangelist my entire career of asking for help, whether it's asking for help from customers or asking for help from peers or asking for help, in this case, from your network in the marketplace when we get to my book and the job search. Big fan of asking for help. It's transformative. My mother taught me it. My mother, whose nickname was Chick, started actually the first council in 1960 in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, where she brought elementary school teachers together to ask for help from each other. And they met for 50 years, 50 years.
Wow. Until
the year before she died. And she was a pioneer, Michael. I mean, no one else was doing it. Vistage, which is for CEOs today, YPO for CEOs. No one else was doing private peer forums when my mom invented that in 1960. And so I grew up learning about it from her. So I started my first peer council in college for progressive student leaders of different organizations. I was running the anti-apartheid movement, others running, gay and lesbian or women's organizations. And then, as I mentioned, at business school with McKinsey, I helped set up this internet business forum for CEOs. And then in the early 2000s, I started the councils. And we've had several thousand people come through the program, every single internet company out there, VP, GM, COO, CEO, very strong in product and CX, not a surprise given my background.
Yeah.
And 2 years ago, we started a new program for young women and people of color and LGBTQ in product and UX who are early career, individual contributor, maybe a first-time manager. We call that the associate councils, and it is going incredibly well, really powerful. We've got a great lineup of companies in there, Apple, Target, Walmart, a bunch of retailers, Uncommon Goods, smaller folks, software companies. Anyway, so yes, and through this entire thread runs asking for help, asking for help, asking for help. it's hard to do, but it is transformative. It's the most important thing you can do in your career. And I talk about this in Never Search Alone because I'm telling people they need to ask for help in their job search, of course.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you a couple of questions before we get to the book. We're going to spend a lot of time on the book. And I do think it is one of the most interesting books I've ever read in this space, just because you're underselling it a little bit, because it's not a book about just asking for help. You put a structure together. It's not just opining about a strategy. It is a roadmap. It's a guidebook. I mean, you just follow the book.
I feel so strongly about that. I wanted this, as I say in the book, it's like a cookbook, right? You get the calories from actually cooking. You can't, not just reading. So I wanted to give some people something they could actually follow. And I have a whole bunch of tools they can also download for free. But anyway, before we get to the book, you were going to say something else.
Well, tell us a little bit about Slow Art Day. You're involved in a lot of other interesting things, but following you on social media, one of the most intriguing things and wonderful things that you do is Slow Art Day. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, Michael, Steve Jobs, when he was still alive, I mean, people quote him a lot, but one of the things he did truly believe and talked about was the importance of visual art in spurring creativity and design and innovation and new ways of thinking. And so, I took that seriously, but there was a big problem. So, a lot of my work, what it ties together is that, I try to come up with a new way, a new environmental design, if you will, to challenge longstanding problems, right? So whether that's customer experience in business, whether that's the job search and how to think about your career, which again in my opinion, hasn't been thought about in any serious way for maybe ever.
Certainly in any new way. And
in any new way, yeah. It's not just. I mean, everything we have today is a digital version of the analog process that's been around for 50 or 100 years.
Yep.
And those are great. LinkedIn's a great tool, but it doesn't address the fundamental problem of how to find a really good job. And many people get very frustrated with the fact they can't seem to find a really good job that they love and that really accelerates their career. But when it comes to art, here's the thing, Michael. People can intellectually recognize that art and visual art is important for creativity and design, but the average person who goes to an art museum, and that already is a select group because most people don't go to art museums. So we're talking already about a minority of people who go, spend 5 to 7 seconds looking at an individual piece of art. And that, my friend, is not enough to see anything. And in fact, half the time is spent reading the card describing the art. And the artist. So
that's true.
I said, listen, we can't just tell people to look at art longer because they're not going to, it's not set up for that. And in fact, museums were in a mode at the time of pushing people quickly through and exit through the gift shop. In fact, there's a famous documentary called Exit Through the Gift Shop. It talks about that dynamic. So I said, listen, this is a well-known problem, but no one's done anything about it. So I launched this movement called Slow Art Day, where every year, in April, I pick the day every year, and me and a team of volunteers from around the world support museums to run their own local events. And what they do is they pick 5 pieces of art that people come and look at for 10 minutes at each individual piece of art, and then have a conversation about it. And this thing has just expanded enormously. By the way, the Art Gallery of Ontario, one of the preeminent museums, of course, in Canada, is a long-time partner in Slow Art Day. But thousands of museums all over the world on every single continent, Michael, including Antarctica at the McMurdo Station there, if you can believe it, runs a Slow Art Day. Incredible. And it's turned into this wonderful movement. And it's really, it's making an impact. It's helping people learn how to slow down and really see. And that has so many implications. Way beyond business, but if you're in business, you should run Slow Art Day sessions with your teams, with your product and design and business teams, so they can learn, something about, and get the spark of creativity that Jobs was talking about.
I was at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam a couple of weeks ago, and I've always internalized, not always, but since you've started this, I've internalized that idea. So I just sat in front of Night Watch for a good half hour. It's one of my favorite paintings.
What a great painting. What a great painting.
Right, like there's just so much going on, and I love that painting. It's now suspended in 3 dimensions. Like it's really just so interesting, and you know, I kind of get what you said. You know, you spend as much time sometimes reading the note card about the painting than you do the painting. You know, it's really a very acute observation. All right, so love, and I'm going to put links to all this stuff in the show notes so people can go explore that.
And I'll just say one thing for your listeners. There's a very simple, slow-looking algorithm that they can follow on their own. So go to a museum with your family or 2 or 3 friends or whatever it is, and it doesn't have to be slow art day. And just in each gallery that you visit, pick up what I call a selector. Pick a selector. All of you spend a couple of minutes walking around. Do quick looking. That's fine. The selector's job is to pick one piece that all of you are going to look at for 10 minutes. So after the first couple of minutes in the gallery, the selector says, "Okay, we're going to look at Night Watch, whatever. We're going to look at the Harvesters, which is a fantastic painting in the Met, whatever it might be." And then you all look for 10 minutes, and then you simply say, "Okay, what did you see?" And let people talk. People love this experience; they love it. You can't stop them from talking. And then you go to the next gallery, and you pick a different selector. And you spend a couple minutes looking around, and that selector picks a piece, doesn't matter what, and you spend 10 minutes looking at it, then have a conversation. And let me tell you, if you do that, you will have an amazing museum experience, way better than anything you've ever done before. And you won't leave tired. You're going to leave energized and excited, and with some of the neurons bouncing around in your brain in new ways.
Yeah, it's really transformational when as you articulate that whole process is fantastic. All right, quick question before we get to the meat and potatoes of the book. You spent your early part of the career helping people figure out, let's call it usability or UX or customers. And looking back or looking ahead, I don't know which direction I'm going. Do you think we're as far down that in terms of solving that as you thought we might be 25 years later? I mean, you laid out some basic principles in the late 90s, which were at the time, but as you sit today, maybe you're doing online shopping yourself, or you're walking through stores, or you're doing a doctor's appointment or whatever. Do you think we'd be farther along, or are you happy with the relative process or progress in terms of what you started out with in your career?
Great question. And I have to say, my answer is both. I am both frustrated with the pace of change and excited with the pace of change. Let me explain what I'm saying. So for a long time, it felt like nothing was changing. I'm like beating my head against a wall. And then in the late 2000s, a new crop of startups came along that had customer experience baked into their DNA. Airbnb is a great example.
Yep.
There are a few issues with the Airbnb website and customer experience. I mean, there will always be with any company. Sure. But fundamentally, they saw a need, they solved it, they've created a great online experience. They've done that well. So, there's a famous saying in science that basically science advances one funeral at a time. I think that business advances one company funeral at a time, right? So a lot of the companies, the older companies they cannot get their heads around this. A few have been able to, but most can't. And they're either dead or dying. There are some major retailers, I won't name them, who frankly I think should just be gone at this point. They haven't done anything new for the customer experience since the 1960s, right? And so, they can't get, out of their own way. I generally don't take a job with a company like that, right? You're going to be much better off working with a company that invests in, and this is, as you know, that I have this structured, time-tested process in the book for how to look for a job, including how to evaluate the culture, the product, the strategy, the CX of a company before you join.
Never search alone, the job seeker's playbook. So first of all, let's talk about the tradecraft, because you didn't just sit down in a quiet room and write this book. Talk about, the tradecraft,
sure.
What you say in the book, 400 revisions. This is it's like WD-40, right? This is 401 version. And talk about the tradecraft of pulling the insights together that formed this book.
Well, it would be hypocritical of me as a longtime customer experience evangelist, right, if I didn't apply that methodology to the writing of my book. I had to do that, right? Like I wasn't going to be able to write a book. Now I had, I mentioned earlier that I run these councils where I bring senior leaders and now, a group of early career leaders in product and UX together. Well, for 20 years, I had been coaching these leaders because they would come to me, the councils is to help them do their jobs better and help them learn from each other. But inevitably, either they get laid off, they'd leave a job, or they'd hit a crossroads and they come to me. And I started, helping them think about their job in a new way. And I was very, very frustrated, again, with the fact that literally, Michael, I don't think this is an understatement. I don't think anyone has sat down for decades and said, how should you look for a job or how should you develop your career in any serious way? There's a bunch of tools out there, but no one has said conceptually, how should this process work? And certainly no one has done it since the internet and product customer revolution, right? So, for example, one of the big ideas in the book is candidate market fit. If product market fit drives business success, candidate market fit drives career success. In other words, you need to think about both what you want and how the market sees you. When you're in a job search, you're the product, and you have to do some research, just like you absolutely have to do research if you're, developing a website, a mobile app, or whatever it is you're doing. But that's like a fundamental thing that's missing from the process, and no one had actually thought about that. So I had started developing that with all of these leaders. And then I said, I got to write this book. I actually, originally I sat down to write a book about asking for help and about career councils, what the kinds of things we do today for members in jobs. But I realized as I was writing, like, oh my God, there's this huge unmet need. As I was saying, no one has really looked at this process. And so I did 250 interviews.
Wow.
Before I started writing, 250 interviews. And you can appreciate what that means as a podcaster. That's a lot of interviews, right? I talked to CEOs. I talked to a lot of I talked to Fortune 50 CEOs. I talked to Fortune 500 CEOs. I talked to startup CEOs, tech CEOs, software CEOs. I talked to VPs of product, GMs. I talked to VPs of customer experience. I talked to directors.
Now in all that, did the thread of insight happen over time? Like sometimes when I do a lot of interviews together, I write a quarterly report on retail. And after the 20th interview, the 80-90% of my narrative is built. And then the rest of the interviews basically substantiate what I was thinking. But sometimes, at 200, is it like, did it come as an epiphany, or did it happen over time, or did it come in the first 10 and then the other 109 kind of reinforced it? How was that process?
So, running customer research, we ran 400 projects for companies, again, like Apple and Facebook and others. And we experienced what you described, right? The first 10 really set the stage and most of the key insights, and then the rest validate. In this process, that was true for a key insight in the book around asking for help. And that key insight was that if you're already a senior executive, C-level executive, CEO, board member, because I also interviewed board members and such, then actually along the way, you've gotten over the stigma of asking for help, and you've learned to do it some way or another. It's actually, and you credit that with propelling you forward. If, however, and that was true for 85% of the people I interviewed at C-level or above. If you are below, especially director level or below, 85% of those people had not yet learned to ask for help and saw some stigma or at least didn't feel like they had the time to do it, right? So that insight came early on and was just reinforced 100 times. A couple other key things came out, right? Which is that people don't think or do any kind of research. But it took me a long time, Michael. It took me maybe 4 years before I finally figured out that, oh my God, what we're talking about here is candidate market fit, that it was analogous to product market fit. It hit me over the head one morning. I felt like, how could I have missed that? How did that take me 4 years to figure out, right?
Now, were you having a coffee? Were you in the shower? I mean, where did that epiphany strike?
I was in that liminal phase between awake and asleep that is so creative. It literally, that voice in my head, woke me up. Candidate market fit, There's 3 big ideas in the book that carry most of the weight. And as you mentioned, there's a 5-step time-tested process, that I've tested. And by the way,
you like fives, by the way, right? You like fives. I like threes. You like a lot of fives. I noticed. Yeah. Everything's 5 for you.
I do. I know. McKinsey teaches you to do threes, but I've gotten to 5s for some reason. But I'll just add one more thing, and then I'll talk about the 5 steps and help your readers get a sense of what this book is all about and the 3 big ideas. But I had 2,000 people I coached. I had 250 people I interviewed before the writing started. And then while I was drafting, I had about 250. I say 200 in the book, but it ended up being about 250 people who were looking for a job read early drafts of the book and give me collectively 2,500 comments that drove 400 major and minor drafts for this thing. And so I think it may be the single most tested book ever written.
Talk about wisdom of the crowd, right? I mean, it really pulls
this book together. This book isn't me sitting in a room thinking big thoughts.
Right,
I'm smart. Let me tell you what to do. Yeah. This book is based on 20 years of working with thousands of people and then hundreds of them using the book and applying it.
Which, by the way, if you wrote a book like that, it would still be a bestseller because you've got so much experience. But the way you did it is let's just say on brand. That's for sure.
Yeah. I really wanted to do it that way. So there's 3 big ideas that carry most of the weight. Let's make sure your readers understand that. The first is the title of the book, Never Search Alone. That idea is, hey, yes, look at when networking, resume, LinkedIn, negotiating, all these things are important. But it turns out the most important thing you need to manage in your job search is your emotional balance. We all, and this is true, Michael, this is true. Like, literally, I have coached and worked with CEOs of internet companies who have sold other companies, had great exits, are extremely well respected. But when they're thinking or they're being recruited, like let's say into a later stage company or whatever, they're feeling the insecurity and anxiety that we all feel in the job search, right? And it turns out, the most important thing you need to manage in the job search is your emotional balance. And because we're a social species, if you form a mutual support group, what I call a job search council of other job seekers, you guys can come together with your anxiety and insecurity, and just by sharing that, convert it into hope, motivation, accountability, and confidence. It is really, really, really powerful. So that's the first idea. Never search alone. Set up a job search council, a mutual support group. The second idea we talked about, if product market fit drives business success, candidate market fit drives career success. So you need to go out and precisely define through a process. I give you both what you want and how the market sees you, right? And let me just say a few things about that. First of all, most of us don't know what we want. And I understand that in the book. And I say, that's why you have to go through an iterative process of drafting out, thinking about what you want, talking to people. You have to go on a listening tour, as I outline in the book, to see how the market sees you, but also get feedback from others who know you about helping you see what you want. And then at the end of that process, you end up with this wonderful clarity. So I tell the story in the book about Dee Dee. So Dee Dee had been a chief data officer at a public company. She left, decided she wanted to become a CTO. Spent a year spinning her wheels, got lots of interviews, but no offers, right? She finally came to me and I said, okay, Dee, first of all, let's get you in a mutual support group. Let's get you in a job search council. So she did that right away. Said, here's a draft of my book, start reading. And then let's get you on a listening tour. Let's find out your candidate market fit, right? So she knew she wanted a CTO job. So that part was done. Again, many people don't know exactly what they want, but she did in this case. So she went out and spoke to people. And one of the things I do is I say, speak to recruiters. And what you do with recruiters is very different from what most people do with recruiters at this stage of the process that I outline in the book. At this stage, you're not asking them for a job. You're asking for their advice, for their expertise. Recruiters love this because candidates always approach recruiters and say, I want this, get it for me. Why don't you get it for me? Or get frustrated. Why? No. Actually, recruiter, what do you think? And I give you 3 questions. What job do you think I could get tomorrow? What's in the ballpark but might be a stretch? And what's beyond my ability to get today? And
I love that third question, by the way. That's a powerful question.
Really powerful question. And so she came, the recruiter said to her, look, you're not a candidate for a classic CTO role. I would never think of you that way. You're outside, the ballpark for that. But there's a new trend of some companies hiring CTOs with data science and data management backgrounds. And for that, you are a perfect fit. And bam, she got her candidate market fit. And within 3 weeks, had 3 offers. And so, it takes the big obstacle that job seekers have is I say, listen, slow down, set up a mutual support group and then a job search council and then go do some research. And people are like, no, I got to get a job now. Even, by the way, even when they have money, I say, how much money do you have? I'm fine. I'm good. I say, well, listen, this is a go slow to go fast process, right? Again, slow art day plays a nice role in here. Slowing down is a powerful way to actually, really do something. And so you slow down at first, but it ends up being faster and better in the long run. And and then the third big idea is that there's 4 legs to the negotiation stool. 4 legs, not just compensation. Compensation is important, and not enough people negotiate comp, although that's changed in the last several years, which is great. But there are 3 more legs to that stool. There's budget, resources, and support. In other words, there's what you need to succeed in that job. And nobody does this. Nobody does this, okay? But if you do it, it's actually even more important than comp. Because if you do it and you get set up to succeed, everything changes in the trajectory of your career. I'll give you a quick A-B example. 2 people. One was they were both chief product officers / chief technology officers in the software world. And they were both experienced in that CPO / CTO role. Okay. Both are getting offers, which is great. Both knew their candidate market fit, but one negotiated budget, resources, and support, and the other didn't. Here's what happened. The first one got an offer from a private equity-backed software company, and during the interview process, and again, I go through this in the book, how to evaluate, he figured out they had about $20 million in technical debt. I'm sure your listeners understand that term. It basically means old systems that are not reliable and that are really holding the business back that you need to bring up to speed so you can start to do innovation and new product development. So I said, listen, you've got to talk to the CEO and board and get their sign off as part of the offer negotiation that they're going to write you a check day one for $20 million to ease that tech debt. He's like, oh my God, you're right. So he goes and he speaks to them and they agree. Day one, they write the check, $20 million. 6 months later, tech debt is retired and he can turn his attention to new product development. He does that. It's really successful. A year later, the company gives him an additional a GM responsibility, to P&L responsibility to run a division of the business. Big deal. And then 6 months after that, they are interviewing him for the CEO role. Wow. Really accelerated. Now take person number 2. This is true, by the way. I'm not making this up. Second person, same thing. CPO, CTO, in his case, private equity backed software firm. He thought they had about 10 million in tech debt. He says that, so I said, you got to negotiate this with the CEO. So he brings it up to the CEO and CEO says, says what many people say at first. They'll say, we'll deal with that when you get on board. Just come on board and make the pitch for it. I said to him, no, listen, you are a really experienced person. You know what you're talking about here. You know you're in the order of magnitude is correct. Maybe it's 8, maybe it's 12, but you got it. He said, he decided not to, push it. Okay. So he doesn't negotiate that. Day 1, no check for $10 million. Month 3, no check. Month 6, no check. There's, I'm not sure we have the money for this, or maybe we don't agree with you. 12 months in, still no check. And now he's looking for a new job. Now he's going to get a job, right? So, but the difference is opportunity cost and career acceleration and impact, right? That other person, number 1, is now at a CEO, level and is being interviewed for those roles. The other person is going to have to go back and get another CPO, CTO role. Hopefully that one will be better. And we do not have unlimited time in our careers, Michael.
Well, my guest is Phyl Terry. The book is Never Search Alone, The Job Seeker's Playbook. It's available now where you love to buy your books. Just before we go, I can't have someone with your experience on the mic without asking, this idea of a new kind of way that we're working. Let's assume maybe it's going to stick around thanks to the COVID era, this hybrid work, whatever you want to call it. Is it as transformational as I think it is, or you think it's passing? What are you hearing from your counsels? I can't think of anyone who's got a better hand on the pulse of this. What in a few seconds, which is, we could probably do a whole other second podcast on this, but what are you thinking about hybrid work and how it influences the workplace?
Let me do one thing real quick before that and then answer that. One is that I just want your listeners to know that in addition to the book, I have a bunch of free tools on my website at phylterry.com. That's P-H-Y, Phil with a Y, P-H-Y-L Terry.com, or neversearchalone.com. So all the tools and templates that I talk about in the book are available free on the website, including a free matching service. If you get the book and you want to join a job search council and you can't get enough people involved, we will come to us for free. We'll help match you with other job seekers so you can get that job search council experience. All right. In terms of hybrid work, I mean, look, if I had a crystal ball, right, I'd be a billionaire. I will tell you a couple of things that I think are critical. Clearly, some version of hybrid is going to be with us for some time to come. And I just want your listeners to know there was a book that came out of Harvard before the pandemic called Someone to Talk To, which had amazing research that showed that half the time that we need help, we don't explicitly ask, and we get that help from people that we bump into in the hallways, unplanned, right? And that drives a lot of innovation and creativity. And that, of course, is almost impossible to do in a remote situation, right? So I'm a believer in hybrid and having some in-person experience, at least for important roles around new product development and so forth, where innovation and creativity is key. But it's this world it's a new world. We are not going back to what we had before the pandemic. That is very clear. We're going forward, and there's a whole bunch of work being done on new kinds of tools that might allow people to do more of that serendipity that I just described in a remote or hybrid environment. We have a number of council members who are actually building those tools today, both inside their companies and starting companies around that. So it's a very interesting moment, Michael. I'll tell you what, though, if you're in commercial real estate, you probably want to move industries.
Yeah, we want to move into warehouses. I think you want to be. Well, listen, not to get ahead of ourselves, but I think it's your next book. I'll wait for that. But for now, thanks so much for joining me. So great to just have the discussion with you. And it's a wonderful book. And as I said, can't recommend it enough. And Phil, you've done such great work. And it was a real treat to catch up and speak with you again. So thanks for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for allowing your listeners to learn about my new book, Never Search Alone. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into this special episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and click and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically twice a week. And check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Conversations with Commerce Next podcast, and the Food Professor podcast with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my all-new YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of M.E. LeBlanc Company and Maven Media. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Have a safe week, everyone.